Welcome to the show, everyone. We are joined by Lane Kawaoka. He is a real estate syndicator and has a unique approach to looking at your what he calls the 1, 2, 3 trifecta that we're going to jump into in a little bit. He started off with single family rentals, started off as a W-2 worker, investing in rentals like many of our clients, and transitioned into full-time real estate investing. And he shows other people how to invest passively and build wealth in a tax efficient manner. So Lane, in your own words, introduce yourself in 60 seconds or less, and then we'll talk about your story and some of the things you're doing.
Yeah, so I guess we've purchased $2.1 billion of assets, over 65 deals. I believe we're over 10,000 rental units. We are in the value add space. So, buy like 1970s, 1980s properties, put a little lipstick on the pig and bump up the rents. But we've been kind of growing and expanding into ground up developments because just a little bit less competition in that arena is kind of the snapshot today.
Awesome. And also, if you go on Lane's site, you can see all the projects he's working on and just a brief description of what they are, the region, the class, and everything else. So it's pretty cool to see some of the stuff he's doing. And he also has a cool podcast. And so let's talk first about how did you go from single family rentals into syndications?
Yeah, I mean, I started what I call the linear path. I think, we were talking earlier about a lot of the listeners. I mean, you're starting working your day job. I graduated from the University of Washington in 2007, started to work for the man as a construction supervisor with my engineering degree. And up until that point, that was what I was taught, right? Study hard, go to school, work at that job for 40, 50 years, maxing out your 401k along the way and buy a house to live in. I bought that house to live in, but because I was working on the road all the time, as a lot of young professionals do, it seemed kind of a waste to have this big house to myself in Seattle, Washington. So I just decided to, on a whim, kind of rent it out. And I realized, wow, this is cool, right? Like you get this cash flow, the tax benefits, you get the mortgage pay down from your tenant, and you get the appreciation. And after a few months of just thinking of it as like a cool beer money check, I started to realize that, hey, if I just did this a handful of more times, saved up, big chunks of down payments for more properties, I would be able to escape the rat race and, quit my engineering job that I didn't like.
Mm-hmm. And then, so what made you, but eventually you went from the smaller single family into the larger syndications, right?
Yeah. So, I just kept buying more properties as I was working my day job. I eventually got into those turnkey rentals that everybody hears. Back in 2012. At 2015, I had 11 of those rental properties. And, the pricing on those things today are a lot more expensive, and the rent to value ratios have definitely gone down under 1%, unless you want to buy a property in the ghetto or Baltimore or Detroit or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But when I was buying them, I was making a few $100s each on them. However, there's maybe an eviction or two every year, some kind of big catastrophe that happened every quarter. Also had a bunch of, when you have that many properties, you have a lot of evictions and things that go wrong. Maybe I lost money on one every three of them, but on average, right, when you pool all the assets together and then their P&Ls, I was making a few $1,000 a month on that stuff. But most of my clients today, we kind of talk about getting to $10,000 to $25,000 of passive income a month. And to get to that level, you're going to need to have 30, 50 plus properties, and that's just not scalable. And around 2015, I started to interact with other high net worth accredited investors, started to join different masterminds. And I just heard it from the horse's mouth, or, more higher net worth investors than I were, and more experienced investors and older investors. And the tune was, yeah, at some point we become an accredited investor. I would say, when you certainly become, the high income earner, even if you're younger or your net worth goes over 500,000, you start to look to private placements and syndications, investing in more commercial real estate. And you kind of get away from owning your own little rental properties with the high liability. And also, when you get into these syndicated deals, you're taking advantage of forced appreciation. Whereas when you're buying little rental properties, all you're really doing is the buy, hope, and pray model, right? You're buying something with a 30-year AM and you're not doing anything to it, right? You're just kind of getting lucky or hoping that the market appreciates, where when you force appreciate an asset, you kind of take fate in your own hands.
Yep. And that first step though, when you talked about when you buy your first rental property in Seattle, were you living in it when you're renting it out as well with that first time?
Yeah, that first one I did.
Yeah.
And the mistakes I made where, you don't buy properties in the nicest area. That's the nicest properties, because you're more on that high end, that class A type of property and clientele. You don't get the rent to value ratios needed to be able to cash flow.
Mhm.
And then I went to more of a maybe B+ B duplex in South Seattle, a little bit rougher part of town. And then I got out of Seattle altogether, right? The primary markets like California, Hawaii, Seattle, New York, it's just not going to work for cash flow, right? And especially after 2015. And that
Yeah.
was where I picked up most of my turnkeys in Atlanta, where you're at, Indianapolis, and Birmingham, Alabama.
Right. So, it's always exciting though when you get your first rent check, right? So, and when you get your first rent check, it's your first time to have tax deductions, because as of 2017, you can't have any unreimbursed business expenses from your employer, and all of a sudden you get to deduct a portion of your mortgage interest expense, and you have the depreciation on a portion of the home that you rent out to your guests, and you can also write off conferences and other sorts of expenditures related to your education and development in your real estate investing career, which is now legitimate, even if your first step is just getting roommates in the house you own. Yeah. So, and in case anyone wants to learn more about the tax implications of house hacking, you can find a quick video I did on the tax treatment of house hacking and how to allocate the portions of your overhead to the guest expenses there. I also have a video called Tax and Investment Strategies to Financial Freedom. And a lot of our earliest content was really focused on getting people out of their 9 to 5 and how tax incentives with real estate investing can help accelerate your achievement of that goal by creating tax savings that are enhanced through massive deductions of cost seg to create refunds to reinvest in your rental properties. And what we've seen with a lot of our clients is this started off with that goal of financial freedom. They had their W-2 jobs and they had their first rental. They're super excited, right? Maybe short-term rentals take advantage of the cost segs to use them to offset their W-2s even without rep status. But what's happening now, and we've talked about this a lot, is a lot of clients now after their third or fourth rental or their fifth or 10th rental, they haven't replaced their W-2 income. They realize that it's easier to make money at their W-2 income than their rentals. And now they can't find deals. It's harder now than it was in 2008 when the market was, when people were afraid to buy. So now people are looking into alternatives. And you discovered this alternative a lot earlier than some of our clients. And now they're, when you're looking at these larger portfolios here, you have the opportunity to purchase larger assets with more cash flow, more appreciation, more opportunities here. And it probably doesn't take, when you consider the amount of time to acquire one of these larger syndications compared to purchase a single family rental for $300,000, it makes you a couple $100. You realize that the value of your time is so much greater when you are dedicating it to these larger assets, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, exactly. And that was kind of where I found myself maybe around 2015 when I had 11 rental properties. I was just going to buy more and more rental properties until I met other higher net worth investors. And that was a transition from, selling off my rentals without 1031 exchanges, of course, and getting into more involved in syndications and private placements as a passive investor. And, like exactly like you said, that's, what we do, in the podcast and on our consulting side is we kind of walk investors by the hand through, if they were an active smaller time landlord and, take them into the world of passive investing. And part of that is the realization, as you mentioned, where, what is your highest and best use? What is the best use of your time? Is it, and for a lot of people reluctantly who may not like their day job, that may be your day job, right? To be a doctor, dentist, or an engineer, that's just where you're going to make the highest amount of money. Than to be like one of these kids on these internet forums who like to buy, rent, rehab, refinance, repair themselves. One of the big things, I was going to kind of go down that road because, I was a younger investor in my late 20s at the time. And I thought, well, I was pretty smart. And, heck, I was a construction engineer, right? Like project management is what I did for a living. However, what I started to realize is, like the landscape of these deals, right? When you're under maybe $1 million, $5 million purchase price on these properties, like a single family home, duplex, triplex, quad, or even an 8-plex or 32 unit, you're in this realm of, the masses, right? Like, I mean, sure, not everybody buys rental properties or an 8-unit or a 16-unit, but a lot of people do. Right, you're competing with the masses, and as computer engineers will call it, there's a lot of crowdiness in that world, and you're paying retail prices, and a lot of times you're competing with unsophisticated investors, even buying those 32 units. And plus, you're not getting enough economies of scale to get a full-time property manager in there, the leasing agent, and more importantly, getting full-time handyman, HVAC staff in there. You don't really get that synergies until maybe you go over 40 to 60 units. And that's kind of where, there's a bit of a gap, right? Like we target maybe 150 units plus, maybe 300 units plus today we develop. But the reason why we're doing that is to get away from the, the kind of the common man investor level, right? Where the competition is the fiercest, there's, bad pricing, and there's not really good economies of scale in that. And we kind of get above that stratosphere and look for some projects that have a little bit of hair on it, because that keeps the institutions away, right? We also have to contend with the larger institutions. They kind of think of them as the big barracuda sharks in the ocean. And those are the people, the good thing is that their investors are just lazy retirement retail investors. So they don't really need to give that good returns, right? They're investing in those REITs, right? That's how they're investing through. So, and they're looking for really easy, stabilized properties. So we can kind of stay in this middle ground between those two thresholds. We find that there's less competition, better deals, and the brokers have kind of told us, like, the way we kind of do these deals where we pool individual LP investors, kind of average guys, right? Like us listening. If you call average guys accredited investors with a net worth of $1 million or greater, I guess we are sort of average accredited Joes out there. But, to pull these types of investors together and get access to these commercial assets that at one time were only accessible to larger institutions is pretty amazing. I guess from the words of the brokers who control these assets.
Yeah, and when you're doing single family, you're not only investing, you're even more of your competition is with other people looking to buy those as primary residence. And those folks, they're not, they may be willing to buy at or above asking based on the school district, or because they want a garden that they love the backyard, they love the neighborhood, and all these other personal reasons. And and then you're buying from people who aren't used to selling properties before, so they're struggling to work with agents and agree on pricing and go through the whole process with you. So when you think about that buying process, obviously is a lot. You'll find greater efficiencies in buying these commercial assets. And we also see a lot of people when they transition from single family rentals or small multifamily into syndications, they start consolidating their assets and selling off these smaller properties. They're finding it's less and less worth their time. So then there's some tax planning opportunities here or implications. Now, you said that you didn't 1031 exchange, and the likely reason why is it's really tricky to 1031 into a syndication. It's possible if you structure it as a tenancy in common. We've seen it a few times being done where instead of owning a piece of the LLC at first, you each own a portion of that real estate, so you can exchange your share of the real estate into an ownership portion of that real estate. But let's say you can't do that. Here's some other ways you can consolidate your assets and sell off your single family rentals into larger syndication type of rentals, or some other ideas. Now keep in mind, this is 2023. We have 80% bonus depreciation. It was easier last year when we had 100, and next year it'll be 60. Who knows what will happen with bonus depreciation? But what's going to happen here is when you sell your property, you get back your principal and your profits. And if you reinvest it in the same year into other syndications and larger multifamily, even if you don't have real estate professional tax status, and this is probably more useful if you don't, because you may have some suspended losses. Any suspended or unused losses because you didn't have rep and you had some tax deductions will be activated and will offset some of the capital gain. And then also when you invest into other multifamily projects, you're almost always going to run a cost segregation study in year one. And then those losses from the depreciation that are enhanced from that cost segregation study and the depreciation are going to create losses to offset the capital gain from the single family rentals you've sold to acquire capital to invest in these multifamilies. So oftentimes when clients tell us, oh, what am I going to do about the capital gains? Do I have to 1031? We say, wait, hold on. Let's look at the suspended losses. Let's look at the depreciation you're going to get from your purchases this year. And we may find that with this or other investments and a combination of other strategies, you may not need to do a 1031, and there may not be any tax implications at all from the capital gains. Some other ideas, you could also invest in qualified opportunity zone funds. If you're tired of landlording and you want to invest passively, you can roll some of those into qualified opportunity zones or Delaware statutory trusts. So lots of opportunities here, but you may find there may be no capital gains at all as long as you're deploying your cash into something.
Yeah, and I'll comment on a few of those. So like you mentioned the first, like the tenant in common, the TIC. We've done them before, but like they're from the operator side, the syndicator side, it is kind of a headache legally. Unless you're going to bring in maybe $1 million, $2 million or more, we really don't want to do it because it's just too much brain damage for everybody involved. And also think about it, right? When you're in value add real estate syndications, we turn these assets pretty quickly, maybe in even a few years, that now you're going to be in the same position and now you're going to have to tick or go into the next asset. So but that's where, like, if you're looking to, going back to my story, when I sold 11 of my rental properties, the first year, of course, I invested in syndications a little bit for a couple of years to make sure this is the way I wanted to go. And then at some point that's just how I do things. I get proof of concept and then I move forward. So 2016, I was like, yeah, these syndications is the way I want to go in the future. So I started to sell off my rental properties. There's a lot of websites out there that sell turnkey rentals to retail investors, right? Because you have a new turnkey investor born every day. So you guys know where those websites are. You can sell it out there with the tenant in place, so you don't have to stop your cash flow. So that's what I did. The first year I sold, I believe, 7 of them. And I had $250,000 of capital gain and depreciation recapture. But because I was investing in private placements previously, I had all this passive losses built up on my 85, 82 form, and I was able to use that to offset all my taxable gain. And really, if you're looking at a capital gain depreciation recapture of $500,000, even $1 million or less, you should be able to recoup that through the passive losses you're getting through syndications if you invest in them, right? I mean, that's kind of what my street level, perspective is. Like investors, most times they're selling a rental property, maybe it appreciated $250,000, or like how I had 7 rental properties that was sold all in 1 year. It usually isn't that much of a capital gain, right? Under $250,000, under $500,000. Just invest in good deals, or there's Mark's got other options out there. We're also doing another deal where we buy equipment and use the Section 179 to get other losses that you don't have to recapture. We're also doing those types of deals for under options like that. But to me, the 1031 exchange is a very archaic option that a lot of people talk about, and a lot of these guys are just salesmen of the 1031 exchange. And to me, it's like the last option, and I think it only makes sense when it's a huge capital gain depreciation recapture of over $1 million, couple million plus.
Yeah, and it's so many times our clients will start to initiate a 1031, and we'll say, hold on, talk to us at first. Like, is there even any capital gains? Now, we've seen instances where we had one prospect who did a 1031 exchange, and we did his return. And the 1031 exchange actually resulted in him paying more taxes. Not to mention the fees to pay the qualified intermediary to run the 1031, but also our fees to report it, because that 8824 form to report the 1031 is a pain in the neck, and we charge a premium to do it on the return. The reason why was he didn't realize that he was actually selling his property at a loss. He didn't realize that. And so when even though you defer your gains with the 1031, you also defer your losses with the 1031 if you were foolish enough to sell to 1031 a property with a loss. So we would have been able to free up that loss when we disposed of that property and actually had a reduction in his taxes. But now, because of this, we actually did not get to write off the losses from that rental property because they were all rolled into the next property. So, but now for our listeners and understanding the tax implications, some high level things you should think about is, if you're relying on the depreciation from your new purchase to offset the capital gains, you want to make sure the capital gains and the purchase are in the same year. So they'll because you can't carry your losses back. But most importantly, before you even think about listing this property, talk to a tax advisor to understand the tax implications of what you're doing.
Yeah, and I also kind of mentioned another one. I worked with a client last week on, I guess he got kind of tricked and duped into doing a cost segregation on a couple of his rentals. And, there's always like a cost analysis, or, analysis of time and money in there. And of course, we can talk about more about this later, but like, you're in the world of financial services, and there's all these people like always selling stuff, like these different solo 401k options and these irrevocable trusts. But like, yeah, one of my clients got sold this cost seg, and I was like, man, you should have talked to me first, because like, you're going to sell these silly rental properties anyway. Like I said, right? Like most accredited investors, they finally realize what a legal liability and headache, and how when you own these properties over time, your return on equity goes way down, and you need to either releverage or sell the asset, and you kind of move on to bigger and more passive activities. But he didn't realize that he did a cost segregation. He paid the money for it, and then he has to sell it and recapture it in a couple of years anyway. What a complete waste of money to do that cost segregation. But I think that's what's hard for investors, right? There's a lot of things you hear on podcasts that sound great, but you don't hear the cons of it, right? Because you're just kind of listening to the surface level stuff, and then the marketing pitch and all these types of strategies.
Yeah, and a lot of we've seen instances where the client thought a cost seg sounded really cool because he heard a promoter of it, but didn't talk to the advisor, and there was zero value to the cost seg because the losses were just going to be suspended because he didn't have a short-term rental, didn't have real estate professional tax status, no tax benefits whatsoever. So the client, the prospect, I remember we were looking through his stuff, and he just wasted $5,000 on a cost segregation study. And also, you want to think about the timing of a cost seg, because it was possible that in a future year, maybe the client's wife could have had real estate professional tax status. You could have done the cost seg in a future year potentially, and create some savings. But if you were to recognize the losses in a year without that rep status, you're totally blowing the opportunity for a future cost seg where the losses could be treated as non-passive. So there's a timing element as well if you find the cost seg is appropriate. So we see this all the time where people think that they can DIY their own tax plan. Just like, save it for Home Depot if you're going to do some DIY, paint your living room or your man cave walls for some DIY projects. But this is not stuff that you DIY. It's great to educate yourself. We love throwing ideas, and a lot of my audience is other tax accountants. But if you're listening and you're a client, you really need collaboration with someone who knows their stuff on these topics.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, it's great to listen to maybe 100 or a couple hundred podcasts, but like at some point you're just hearing the surface level stuff. And I think all that prepares you to do is, have a good educated conversation, and empowered discussion with Mark, and mix it up with other accredited investors. And that was kind of, I think that's what I kind of teach a lot is, interact with real, purely passive accredited investors. I mean, kind of a couple insights I have from the operator, general partner, sponsor side, that you mentioned earlier about cost segregations. There's a kind of a little marketing trick that people in our industry will use to trick people. Well, not trick people, to get them a little bit sense of urgency is like, last year was 100% bonus depreciation. This year's 80%. And then if we go down to 60 and it's going to sunset, who knows if it's going to get bumped back up to 100, but that's kind of one of those, little marketing tricks to get people excited about, they gotta, it's to get FOMO, right? But, that bonus depreciation is kind of the cherry on top. It's not the majority of the depreciation, at least what I've seen from the difference between 2021 K1s on deals with cost seg and 2022 K1s. You're still getting a lot more than your standard 27 straight line depreciation that you're getting on your little rental properties. With commercial assets, even without the cost seg, there are certain items that are able to be depreciated a lot quickly and aggressively. Whereas, I don't know if you have any comments on that, but like Mark,
Yeah.
because you see a lot of K1s, I haven't really seen too much of a difference from last year and this year with bonus depreciation going down 80 to 80%. I mean, I think the big thing for people that don't realize is the bonus depreciation portion is not the entire portion. I would say it's a very minority portion of it that's going down 20% every year.
Yeah. So, when we do our 2023 tax returns, we're going to see a little bit less of benefits from the cost seg, but you're still seeing a lot of benefit from the cost seg because at 80%, it's still pretty good, but the remainder amount of let's say your 5-year life property that you would have in a prior year written off 100%, you're still going to accelerate the depreciation and push it up to the first 5 years. And you do what's called double declining basis depreciation. So in the first 2 years, you're going to write off more than 40% of that asset. So you're still going to see a lot of benefit here. Now, the instances where I say that clients may be stressed, it was a wonderful time to see 100% bonus depreciation, and there still is a lot of benefits in the cost segs. But I would say one area where I would say we are going to see a less of an ROI here is we have a lot of clients that were investing in these short-term rentals that were like maybe $250,000 to 500, to 300, 400, $500,000, where we could do a simplified cost seg and maybe free up like $100,000 of a tax deduction and you would, in that instance, there might be opportunities here to get back a portion or all of your down payment into these smaller rentals from the cost segs. And what we're going to find is when we're down to maybe a $0 bonus depreciation, we're going to see that you're going to need a larger and larger rental property to justify doing a cost seg. But for institutional investors such as yourself, your strategy is not going to change at all. It's more for when we think about these smaller early stage investors where there's going to be less and less opportunities, and cost seg is not going to really make as much sense on these smaller types of properties in the future.
Yeah, I mean, what some of my clients are doing, if they're electing to hold on to their little rental properties, is there's these, I call them fake cost segs.
Mhm.
where, it's kind of a desk review. Nobody actually goes out and visits the property like they're supposed to. But the firm that does these things, they'll get little insurance policy to protect you through an audit, but to me, it's a little bit, understand the risks that are involved with it. But if you can get it for maybe $500, it might make sense. But for most of my clients or accredited investors, they realize pretty quickly that they're going to dump these rental properties pretty quickly. So doing all these cost saves, extracting the depreciation, especially if they already have a lot of passive losses built up, does them no good. Instead, when they do sell the assets, their plan is to go into other syndicated deals. They pick up the passive losses in the first year, which is a huge, huge, bump. Like sometimes what I'll see, an investor invest 100 grand in like a normal deal with normal leverage, normal down payment, and maybe they're getting 50 grand, maybe even 100 grand, somewhere in that range of losses that first year, which definitely offset, maybe you got a few $1,000s of cash flow that first year, definitely offset that. So you may have like 50, 80 grand of still losses still built up, right? And if you do that a few times, you can see where you'll have maybe $100,000, $200,000 of passive losses built up to offset the sale if you're selling the rental properties as you're transitioning over into the LP world. If not, like I said, there are other mechanisms, like Mark said, like qualified opportunity zones, which I'm not a huge fan of. I don't like to invest in crap areas, like bad, rough areas like that. But there's several options. I'll also throw out another one out there, Section 179, going into syndicated deals with equipment, and then using those losses to offset any capital gain depreciation. And that's typically what a lot of my investors will do. They'll invest the first few quarters, and then in Q4, sometime after Halloween, they start to actually look at their taxes, how much passive losses they have under 8582 form, and then they kind of maybe at that point strategize with their CPA like Mark, and then they'll kind of like see how much exactly do I need, am I good, and then maybe invest in a couple of deals more, let the tax tail wag the dog in a way.
Yeah, we um and qualified opportunity zones are interesting because the QOZs can be in real estate, but we've also seen some QOZ funds investing in other businesses. It's what we recommend. We presented the opportunities of them to our clients, but with our demographic of clients, is a lot of them like to control their assets a little more, and you kind of can't do that. The cool thing that gets some people excited about the qualified opportunity zone funds is that you can kind of treat it as a supercharged Roth, and that if you hold on to it for 10 years, you're not going to pay any capital gains on the disposition on it. However, it has to be, the investment has to make sense. And if it doesn't make sense, just like anything, I mean, yes, there are some tax advantages, but if the return on investment is trash, then what's the point? You'll save some money in taxes, which is, well, it'll justify some of it, but you really want to make sure you're investing in the right people too.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think sometimes like to go into a rough investment like that, at the end of the day, it may not make sense. But I'll give you an example of something where it may, right? Like say an investor wants to pull off real estate professional status strategy, and they go buy a couple little rental properties. It maybe costs them 60 grand to do that, but it allows them to get this rep status badge and now use all their losses to lower their income from 800 grand down to 500,
Yeah.
saving them $150,000 every single year, right? That's a quick cost benefit analysis right there where it makes sense. So that analysis needs to happen, on all these decisions.
Yeah, and you'll still get losses from the QOZ. Your basis isn't diminished like it would be from a 1031. So there's a whole, and then a lot of people who aren't investing in real estate can use those to defer cap gains as well, which is kind of neat. Now, what I want to talk to you about what you call the SPC 123 trifecta that you've discussed in the past, and talked in particular we haven't had much of an opportunity to talk about infinite banking for real estate investors. So I think our audience would be really interested for you to introduce this topic and how you've explored it and explained it with other people and help them find success.
Yeah, I mean, I think, when I was kind of going through this education process myself, like there's so much stuff, right? Like there's so much noise out there. Um, I'm a big 80/20 guy, and I'm always trying to search for what are like those big wins that make the most impacts. And what I've discovered, it's number one, which is invest in good deals, commercial or value add deals that have your money backed by real estate in tough times. And these are finding the syndication operators and general partners that's going to run your money, so you can just be a LP and focus on your highest and best use, which is likely at your day job. And then as we mentioned, you get a lot of losses through that, a heck of a lot more when you're a little landlord yourself. And now you're equipped with all these passive activity losses to play and execute different, more advanced strategies on the taxes side, which is number two. For a lot of our clients that are the higher income earners, number two, the taxes may be a biggest, benefit, especially in the beginning, right? If somebody can lower their tax bill from 300 grand down to 150, as we mentioned in that previous example. But unless you invest in deals, number one, you don't get the passive losses to go and play and execute these strategies. So those are the two big ones. The third is infinite banking, or what we kind of configure it a little bit differently, where there's less of a time commitment on it. We call it accredited investor banking. But make no mistake, that is number three. It is like a fraction of the impact of number one and two, deals and taxes. But when you execute these three synergistic strategies, I mean, this is kind of why I do what I do. Like a lot of this isn't anything breathtaking, right? It's very different than what we're all taught, but this isn't something that the average accredited investor Joe can't execute on their own. And yet it's very different what we're all taught to do, right? Invest in 401ks, qualified retirement plans. To me, it's a very rare place for those types of vehicles, especially kind of when you get on this simple passive cash flow 1, 2, 3 plan. But when you're on this plan, I think you get to financial freedom in about a third of the time. And a lot of my investors are kind of busy bees, and they listen to a lot of podcasts like ours, and they're always in search mode, right? But I tell them, hey, once you're doing these 1, 2, 3 strategies, like chill out. You're somewhat optimized, right? You just enjoy life. You'll get there, right? This is not a get rich quick scheme, but like I said, in a third of the time, it typically takes the average, white knuckle saver to get there. You're on the path, right? You're cruising down the highway at 85 miles an hour, as I say.
Yeah. So I think about these conversations I've had with my clients as well, because, yeah, and then some clients will come to us trying to propose different tax strategies. Yeah, and then I'm thinking to myself, you make $500,000, $2 million a year. Why are you wasting your time dabbling in tax strategy? That's not where your 20% is. Thinking about where you can channel your energy that's going to create the greatest return here. And is it in these, we create, exploring these ideas that they'll never really fully implement. We had one client try to start a landscaping business to create tax losses, and going through the headache of buying a truck to get the depreciation. And I just said, hey, if you want to get more losses, just pay me more, right? Like, what are you doing here? Like, where's the value in, just, we just see it so much with entrepreneurs getting the flashy object syndrome and starting too many businesses. A common one where I see where almost everybody operates at a loss at is drop shipping. They get seduced by some ad saying you can make $100,000 a month only working 4 hours a week, and they all lose money. I see all the numbers, and these are people who actually have really good jobs that pay them well, and they have a degree, and they're making above 6 figures. So, these are the vehicles like that you're discussing that allow people to make the best use of their time and focus their energy on the areas that are going to create wealth and income, and to grow that passively, and to not dabble in all these different things. And there's a few good books I enjoyed on and have checked out on the topic on using life insurance to build wealth, which is really powerful. You got the look before you lerp, and the power of zero. David McKnight has some cool stuff. I heard him talk, and we're probably going to do we actually scheduled a workshop on using life insurance, not only for protecting yourself and your family, but as a vehicle for building wealth. Very powerful vehicle, and lots of cool ways you can use it. You can finance your premiums. There's there's a different, there are some areas of decisions and complexity to navigate with a professional, but there's definitely some wonderful opportunities in this area, and it's passive.
Yeah, I mean, we've got like a 2-3 hour e-course with a webinar in there. People want to get access to that, just reach out. But yeah, I mean, I think the way I think what we focus more of on our consulting side is more the higher level. We'll teach people how to do this type of stuff, but then we'll use professionals like Mark specifically for the tax side, right? But where we kind of specialize, or what I enjoy more, is like the high level consulting, getting people through these elevators of the wealth, or I call it the wealth elevator, which is what my new book is going to be called, where you're kind of getting through these stages, right? Most people listening are on the first and second floor. Your net worth is $1 million, $2-3 million. But once you get past that $3 million mark, you're knocking on the doorstep of 4 to 5 mil, which is, I call, end game for most people. End game at that point, you can pretty much live off of 5% of your holdings and never eat into your pile, and essentially you're weightless. You've cracked the code on financial independence. And at that point, you don't really need more money, right? To do all these strategies to accelerate yourself going up the elevator isn't really helping you. It's more about, building relationships with other passive investors. That's where you find deals, right? I mean, that's the biggest issue here. That's why I emphasize deals so much, because there's so many just fake it till you make it operators. I mean, you type it into your social media, now you're inundated by all these like fake it to make it sponsors who've done less than $1 billion of deals each. And, people ask me all the time, and we have, people want to get access to our free syndication LPE course. It's 8 hours, feel free to let us know, but, you'll be educated at that point. But to me, it doesn't really, you don't reach that next level of expertise until you start to mix it up with other LPs, right? And unless you know a prerequisite baseline, which kind of we teach, until you come to a real event or meet other purely passive accredited investors investing in dozens of deals, you're not really cracking that country club realm yet. And that's the big thing. I mean, when I first started to sell my rental properties, get into, syndications, private placements, I didn't know anybody who was an accredited investor. Nobody in my family had $1 million, let alone investing in these country club syndicated deals. I kind of just went off gut feeling and what made sense to me. And I invested like 1 out of every 5 deals initially. My first dozen plus deals were these fake it to make it, people who seem cool, but, one guy stole the money, a couple other guys just were incompetent. And that was kind of why I started to become a general partner and do deals on my own, because I didn't trust anybody because they got burned so much. But that's kind of what being an LP investor is all about when you're making this transition. You don't know anybody. You don't know who's real. You don't know the past performance. I mean, it can all be fabricated and lied. And that's why I say the only real way to verify this stuff is to meet other past investors who invested with these people firsthand in the past.
Yeah, and I think now, because we were in a time of rapid inflation, and where property values were skyrocketing. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it has appeared to me that there was a time where almost any syndication was the probability of a syndication being successful was very high. You just had to find a property, have some decent people around, and it didn't seem as much of a challenge as it is today to find a deal where you're going to have a good exit strategy. Where I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it appears to me now that things are getting a little more challenging with the interest rates being as high, and that there's a greater risk that some of these syndicators are going to operate and sell at a loss or get foreclosed on, and need more cash from these investors. And we're approaching a time where you really need more skills to guarantee your success, and maybe some of the earlier folks who are more pretenders and maybe just banking on the economic conditions are going to suffer if they're not using the proper foundational decision making and analysis to have success here.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're exactly right. But real estate is kind of easy, right? It's one of the most easiest basic businesses out there. It is a very forgiving asset class that it is easy, right? Let's just leave it at that. But exactly to your point, I mean, we stopped doing the value add multifamily deals last summer 2022 when interest rates started to creep up. I mean, I can't make deals pencil, quite honestly, because now they make, instead of me being able to get 70% loan to value, the loan to values that you're able to get with higher interest rates are like 60%. So you got to bring more equity to the table. So you're just not going to get that returns you're going to hit. And so we haven't really pulled the trigger on deals. And, in this high interest rate environment, we've kind of focused more on preferred equity, which is debt, to be more conservative and be on the safer side. And then also just put our head down more on the development side, which again is less competitive, right? There's not all these syndicators running around and have the track record to get the loans from the bank, right? To develop 200, 300 unit apartment complexes like we do. But that's, like we kind of started, buying little class C, 50 units, 100 unit properties, built up from there as quickly as possible, because the class C properties are just a horrible clientele. Like we would have like delinquency in the 20% range where, out of 10 units, you'd have 2 people just not pay you all the time. That's just how it works. So we kind of quickly stepped up to class B assets with a little bit better clientele and a lot larger scale, 200 units plus. But even that, you feel all these bumps in the road of pandemics, eviction moratoriums, supply chain, and then now stagflation with expenses increasing, right? With inflation, obviously, that it's kind of squeezing those types of deals. And that's why, we're constantly trying to swim upstream away from the competition, right? From the guy who goes to the weekend boot camp, pays $50,000 to have a guru mentor now. And then, because we asked the question ourselves, right? I asked the question maybe 5 years ago, like, where are the operators and sponsors who have been around for more than a decade? And the truth is, they get out of this industry and they go to more institutionalized asset classes, or they develop. And that's kind of the path we're kind of taking at this point. Still better than buying little rental properties, but, I think, it is a very crowded space. And as people get into it, you start to realize, wow, there's a lot of multifamily syndicators out there. And, but unless you ask, or you Google the right words, you're not going to find it. And then I think that's kind of why we do what we do, right? We kind of expose people to this so they can get out of, just the buying a rental property mode and go into this bigger world. But as I tell my investors, right, like, this is what I personally do. There's always something better. I think when I started the podcast, you and I were talking earlier back in 2016. At that time, I was talking about buying rental properties as, remote turnkey rental properties. I thought that was the jam. I thought that was the way to do it. Obviously, boy, was I wrong, right? And this is what I kind of been constantly trying to learn, is like trying to get to that next level, right? What are the people that are 5 million, 10 million, 50 million doing, right? To kind of distill down and kind of bring tips back to my audience, and hopefully it helps them expedite things. Like, if that means not buying a rental property because you just have too much money and it's just not scalable, then I think that's the way it manifests itself, that people can expedite and cut time cycles out of to where they want to be.
Wonderful. So we talked about your background and your progression into what you're doing now. What do you do outside of real estate, and what do you do for fun?
I don't. I'm a general partner, and these are the difficult times, right? Right now for us. When there's a recession, things will kind of get a lot easier for us as interest rates go back down. But right now, it's all hands on deck for us. I'm in that growth period of my life. I'm in my late 30s, and this is the way it's going to be for the next, I would say, decade. Right?
Mhm.
I am not old and gray and slowing down.
Yeah.
I've got a 2-year-old, so that kind of keeps me busy too on the personal side. I have no time for golf and hobbies and friends these days.
I know the feeling.
Yeah.
Especially
We're the sandwich generation, right? We're in the middle. We're the worker bees in the middle. But it's fine. I enjoy, interacting and helping out individuals because, I realize, nobody talks about this type of stuff, right? Taking HELOCs out on their primary residence to get lazy equity going, investing in these syndicated deals and, implementing a credit investor banking. I get a lot of pride and ego boost off of, kind of helping people in this one specific way, I think.
so I think that there's a unique, and I think you and I are in this unique age group where we graduated right as the recession was hitting. And for me, it was devastating because in my past life, I was trying to be a social studies teacher and a real estate agent to pay for my social studies education. And I was in New York City where it all went down, and you couldn't make a buck as a real estate agent, and the real estate was meant to finance the schools, but because the real estate all tanked, there was no money for the schools. So there was a citywide hiring freeze for social studies teachers. So I couldn't make a dime no matter how hard I tried. So with all the debt I accrued during those years, it's similar to you. I was put in a position where I find that I'm forced to work and have worked far more and had to be far more resilient than the people younger than me who already were ready to anticipate the changes and come out into a more favorable job market, and also the people older than me who already had their jobs locked in before the recession. So I do think there's this age group of us that just had to grind it out and work harder than everyone else. And then we look at the people older and younger than us, and sometimes we're like, they look like a bunch of softies at times.
Yeah. I mean, I recognize the role that I've kind of chosen, being the general partner of all these deals, and like people rely on myself and the team a lot. I mean, but like for most of the clients, and I'm sure the way you see it too, right? Like, I mean, I push the simple life, right? Like if you can get yourself past 2.5 million net worth, and then it's kind of feels like downhill getting to 4 to 5. Once you're at 4 to 5 million, I mean, to me, that's end game. Most of our clients don't need more than $25,000 passive cash flow per month. We do events, and we line people up in terms of their burn rate, and nobody in the room is higher than a quarter mil or $25,000 a month, and therefore, $5 million as a base to live off of that 5%. Of course, they're better investors. They can probably get 10% plus, but at 5%, assuming that it's their unsophisticated children taking over the estate, is enough. And at that point, there comes a point where you cross that crossover point, and it's more important. Time is more valuable, just living your life, because you never know when, it's over. And that's kind of the goal, is in getting people as quickly to that point and have them go from scarcity mindset to abundance mindset, and then, enjoying the money, right? I mean, we had the Die with Zero guy, Bill Perkins, on my podcast. That was a big takeaway for our group, right? We did a big book study on that. In the beginning, right, you need a hustle, but there's a point for everybody where they need to get a hustle mindset and into more of abundance and enjoying and spend your damn money.
Yeah. So at first, you're going to have the highest return on your cash because you're using a lot of elbow grease. Your ROI may be higher on some of your actions that you're doing, whether you're doing be wholesaling or you're self-managing some short-term rentals and you're really in the weeds. But then when you get older, you want to have a greater return on you start evaluating the return on your time. Obviously, ROI is still very important, but you start seeing a greater return on your time. So your time is limited and you want to use the minimum amount of time to generate what you need to support yourself and live a good, rich, and abundant life.
Yeah, I would say most of our clients are 47 years old, 1.5, $2 million net worth. They've got 2 kids, maybe ages 9, 12. That's kind of most of our clients, but there are different people that are kind of my age or below that they make $150,000 plus out of college as computer programmers, dentists, and they they max out their 401ks. They follow the whole Boglehead sphere, the personal finance fire movement, but they don't feel comfortable in that because they make so much more money and they know there's something else. And that's kind of what we're in this realm of how to be good stewards of your money and also grow it and get it to that next level, extend the wealth elevator, as we say.
Very cool. Okay, well, Lane, can you tell the audience where they can go to learn more about you and further explore investing in your deals and learning from you?
Yeah, they can, they're podcast listeners. They can check out Simple Passive Cash Flow podcasts on passive real estate investing. And they can check out the website, simplepassivecashflow.com. When the new book, The Wealth Elevator, will be coming out later on this year, they can check that out. But yeah, again, email team@simplepassivecashflow.com.
Wonderful. All right. And that'll all be in the show notes to those listening on either here on YouTube or on the podcast. All right. Well, and Lane, thank you so much for your time. Hope you guys enjoyed the show. And if you want to learn more from Lane, you have his info. And also, if you're interested in our consultations or someone who can join our team as a hire, email info@markperlbergcpa.com.